So let's talk about character optimization and how it relates to Neverwinter Nights. Taking the perspective, asking the question, is Neverwinter Nights a role-playing game? I mean, it's a Dungeons and Dragons focused game, but are there role-playing aspects? Or is it simply a min-max type game? And the duality of this question is, on the one hand, Neverwinter Nights does a great job of creating this simulation of being in a D&D game. You've got monsters, you've got stories, you've got NPCs, you have different quests, different dialogues that can open up. And if we were able to pop out those metrics and show that decision tree, I'm sure it would be very, very complex. I know it's very, very complex. This is not a criticism, but it's never going to match a true Dungeons and Dragons tabletop or virtual game where one is interacting with a dungeon master, because in that moment, whatever question a player asks or whatever dialogue option they might like to take it, the DM is going to calculate that and respond. So from that perspective, I would not say Neverwinter Nights is a true RPG. It's a good simulation of it. Now, on the opposite end, being a simulation, being a D&D 3.5, 3.x rule set, for those of you who are more familiar with the current edition of D&D, it has its genesis in the 3.0 rule set, which is essentially about beating certain numbers. Now, D&D has always been about beating certain numbers. You want to hit that monster, roll a d20, add up all your modifiers, and check the armor class. Do some damage. Have you done enough damage to beat the monster's hit points? Want to perform an action? There's a difficulty check assigned. Roll a d20, add up the modifiers, yes or no. It is very binary, essentially pass or fail. Pass or fail with illusions of other options that are out there. That is the D&D 3.5 system. If we go back a couple of other generations, now we'll put 4.0 out for a moment. If we look at Dungeons and Dragons Redbox or AD&D, certainly things were binary in that you want to hit THACO. What's your THACO? You want to hit, go up against the armor class. You want to do damage. You want to be able to lift or kick down that door or bend those bars. What's your strength? Roll the dice. I mean, there were binary yes or no checks. But at the same time, AD&D and early D&D, much was left up to the dungeon master. We want to have a conversation back and forth where you're trying to bluff your way past some guards. You'd make your case. You'd say to the DM, this is what I want to say. This is what I want to do. They might take into account charisma or wisdom. They take into account the reputation of your character, just how intimidating you are, or that bluff, and they would say success or failure. Or maybe it's a dialogue, even a dialogue back and forth. D&D 3.5, leading into the Neverwinter Nights engine, the fact that it stacks. So I'm rolling a d20 to make a persuasion check. Well, with my modifiers, with my charisma bonus, with class bonuses, with feats, at the higher levels, with certain magic items, before I even roll that d20, doesn't matter what the DC is, I've got like a plus 28 before I even roll it. So we see this idea of min-max, where the engine for Neverwinter Nights, based on 3.5, D&D 3.5, means piling on the numbers, you will succeed at everything. Okay, that was the foundation leading into this. And this is not a criticism of Dungeons & Dragons or Neverwinter Nights. I've spent many fabulous, wonderful hours playing both of those systems and intend to continue playing those systems. Right now, I just made my way through the academy. I'm in the city core. No spoilers. I'm playing a fighter wizard. I'm going to do fighter 20, wizard 20, and play it from that perspective. And that's what was leading into this vlog. Optimization versus non-optimization. If you optimize a character, optimized character means the character class, you are pumping up those primary attributes, right? As a fighter, you are going to pile into strength. You could build a dex-based build. You could have certain weapon proficiencies, but you're just looking min-max. How do I get the most numbers? Pile on the strength. Pile on the constitution for hit points. Pile on the feats. Specialize and focus on select weapons in the game. Essentially, pump those numbers up so high, pump up the number of attacks so high to the point where the game engine itself can't keep up. You are going to be able to defeat everything, especially as you make it into the epic levels where everything is accelerated even further. That is one way to play the game. And that's not to say that there aren't a couple of tough fights in the various quests and the various adventures that you'll play your way through. And it would be ideally be optimized to do that. But given the limitations of the quests, given the limitations of the game engine, it is very easy to min-max playing through the campaigns. Now, server-based or other things, that's a separate story. But from that perspective, I have found playing a min-max character, you're missing out on some of the excitement. You're missing out on some of the possibility. I don't want to say play a flawed character, but playing a character that is not optimized with other potential aspects to bring in. And again, I'm using a fighter wizard as an example, because that in terms of optimization is possibly the worst where you can go. And it is one of my favorite character classes to play, meaning I don't even have primary attributes that overlap. So as a fighter, I've got strength and I've got constitution. Dexterity maybe depends on the armor, but eventually I'm going to tank out and those bonuses. Not that I wouldn't want dexterity for certain tumble checks and other things from that area, but I'm putting my points into that, starting points and leveling up points. But I also need to put points into intelligence from that perspective. And that's before we even get into knowing how Neverwinter Nights operates, where certain charisma bonuses and wisdom bonuses will open up quests or open up dialogue or open up various mini aspects of the game. So we don't really have dump stats. I want to put those things in. So I have a fighter that is not optimized, and I'm splitting my attacks between and my progression between wizard and fighter. I've also got to deal with arcane spell failure. I mean, there's a lot. We're not going to turn this into a fighter/wizard vlog, but the point of what I'm saying is, in playing a non-optimized character, there is enough diversity in Neverwinter Nights. There is enough ways through potions and through spells to buff yourself for that moment where you need to be overpowered. You need to be min-max. And by playing a flawed character or by playing a character that is not as optimal, it opens up a lot more interesting play and tactics, just by having two different character classes or maybe three if you want to divide up those levels. Brings in more feats, brings in more different skills to try things out, brings in just tons of magic items, unless you're obviously playing a rogue with UMD and things from that perspective. But exploring this idea that while Neverwinter Nights is a min-maxed game with a limited decision tree, although, again, that limit is very, very massive, but it is not going to equate playing tabletop D&D, you can still play a flawed character and make your way through all of the campaigns. Make your way through a lot of the downloadable content from that perspective and really play the game well. There'll be a couple of tight spots in there, no spoilers, but buffs, potions, the correct henchmen, the use of different tactics will allow you to overcome those things while opening up on that role-playing side and on the diversity side of interactions and skills, a lot more variety. Okay, your thoughts. Fritz, you always play min-max. I mean, it's D&D 3.x. That's what you have to do. Or if we really look at all the levels, the way the game scales, you do reach a point where even if you are not optimized, agree or disagree, you still have enough numbers and enough modifiers to beat whatever it is that you need to beat.